Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is the show where we take a deep dive into the source material behind the big ideas. Our goal is to help you get informed thoroughly, but also quickly.
And today we're looking at a passage that's, well, it's a tough one for a lot of people.
It is. We're in Genesis chapter 12, looking at verses 10 through 20. This is the story of Abram right after he gets this incredible covenant call from God.
Right. And you'd expect, the next chapter in his life to be this story of a hero of the faith. A perfect example.
The paragon of faith, yeah.
Exactly. But the scriptures just don't do that. They immediately shatter that kind of moralistic idea. The story isn't here to show us a biographical lapse, a simple mistake. It's here to show that the covenant of grace depends completely on God's sovereignty, not on the obedience of the person who receives it.
So we're looking at this first great crisis of faith for Abram and what his failure actually teaches you about how God holds on to his people. The way the story is structured here is really, it's abrupt. The sources we're looking at call it the jarring juxtaposition. Because in the first 9 verses of Genesis 12, Abram is on a spiritual high. He leaves his home, he travels to the promised land, he builds an altar, he's doing everything right.
He's a model of obedience. And then, boom, verse 10 hits.
It's like a slamming door. Now there was a famine in the land.
It really is. There's no transition. And that Hebrew word, Rahab, it's not just, a bad harvest. This is a full-blown disaster, a life-threatening test.
And the fact that it happens right there in the land of promise, the place God just gave him, that has to be intentional.
It's absolutely intentional. The land of blessing becomes the stage for this immense trial. It shows you that receiving God's promise doesn't mean you get a pass from the hardships of this fallen world.
So this isn't just bad luck. The famine is. It's a tool.
Our sources call it a sovereign instrument of divine providence. It's a probe. It's designed to see how deep Abram's trust in God really is.
God just promised to make him a great nation, and now he can't even feed his own household.
Exactly. And that's the test, isn't it? When the things you can see, the food, the water, when that all disappears, can you still trust the God you can't see?
He trusted God to leave his home city of Ur. But this is a different kind of test.
It's a harder test. It's one thing to go somewhere new on a promise. It's another thing to stay in a place of suffering on that same promise.
And his response is immediate. He went down to Egypt. Now, to us, that sounds like a smart move. Go where the food is.
It sounds practical.
Yeah.
And geographically, it's correct. He's going from the highlands down to the Nile Delta.
But that phrase, went down, the Bible uses it in a specific way, doesn't it?
It does. That Hebrew word, yarad, it's often a spiritual signal. It means moving away from God's blessing, from his presence. You see it with Jonah, who goes down to Joppa, down into the ship, trying to run from God.
So Abram's physical journey is mirroring a spiritual one.
He's taking a step down, away from faith. He's trading the theology of that altar he just built for the pragmatism of the world.
And that gets at this core contrast the sources highlight. Canaan versus Egypt.
This is so key to the whole story. Canaan, the promised land, is described in Deuteronomy as a land that depends on the rains of heaven.
So its survival is totally in God's hands.
Right. It's a life of faith, moment by moment. You have to trust God to send the rain. Egypt, on the other hand.
Egypt has the Nile.
It has the Nile. It's predictable. It's controllable. They had massive irrigation systems, human engineering. Their whole society was built on a guaranteed abundance that they controlled.
And their pagan gods were tied to that abundance.
Exactly. So Abram is making a choice. He's abandoning waiting on God for rain, a life of faith, to go get a guaranteed meal in a place that runs on human ingenuity. It's a trade. Faith for sight.
One of the most striking things in the text is what's not there. The sources call it the silence of unbelief.
That silence is deafening. The Hebrew grammar in verse 10 uses this chain of verbs that just pushes the action forward. And there was a famine, and Abram went down. It's quick, decisive.
He just acts.
He just acts. What's missing? He doesn't go to the altar. He doesn't ask God, should I go? Will you provide for me here?
There's no prayer. No consultation.
None. He's acting on pure survival instinct, driven by what he can see, the famine, rather than what he's been promised. The moment he decides God can't feed him in Canaan is the moment the next failure becomes almost inevitable.
So that rapid-fire language in the Hebrew, it's mirroring his panic.
It's the language of panic. A man who is relying on sight doesn't stop to pray. He's alone with his fear. And fear, when it's cut off from God, is the worst possible guide.
Okay, so he gets to the border of Egypt, and that silence we talked about is finally broken. But he's not talking to God.
No. He's talking to his wife, Sarai. And what he says is, as one source puts it, a calculated conspiracy.
The fear of the famine has now turned into the fear of man.
It has. And Proverbs tells us the fear of man is a snare, a trap. And Abram walks right into it. His whole thinking process is laid bare.
He sees Sarai as a liability, not his wife. He sees the Egyptians as a threat he can't overcome.
And he sees himself as a victim who has to come up with a clever plan to survive. He's completely forgotten about God as his protector.
This is what the sources call theological amnesia in action. It's such a powerful phrase.
It is, because he can see the physical facts perfectly. He knows Sarai is beautiful, even at 65. He knows powerful men will want her. His worldly assessment is spot on.
But he has completely forgotten the spiritual fact.
He's forgotten the covenant. God literally just promised him in verse 3, "Him who dishonors you, I will curse." By thinking the Egyptians can just kill him and take his wife, he's basically saying their power is greater than God's promise.
So he's acting like a functional atheist.
That's the term. He's making his decisions based on survival probabilities as if God is just absent, as if God's power stops at the border of Canaan.
And this leads him to the lie. Say, you are my sister.
The infamous lie.
Now, we find out later in Genesis 20 that she actually was his half-sister. Some people use that to soften what he did here.
Yeah, but we can't let that detail get him off the hook. In this context, it's an absolute deception. The intent is what matters.
He's trying to mislead them about her marital status, about her availability.
Exactly. If she's just his sister, Pharaoh can take her, and Abram gets brought into the royal family. He's protected. But she's his wife, the mother of the promised nation. The lie is designed to protect his own skin by putting her in jeopardy.
It's a half-truth that functions as a whole lie.
It's weaponized.
Yeah.
And it's the complete opposite of a life of faith, which calls for truth, even when it's dangerous.
And his motive, I mean, he states it so clearly, it's chilling.
It's all about him. He says that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake, my well-being, my life.
It's raw pragmatism. The end my survival justifies any means, even endangering the covenant promise itself.
And he uses his wife as a human shield. It's a complete reversal of the husband's role. He's supposed to be the protector.
It's an inversion of the creation design.
A total inversion. And it shows you just how necessary the covenant of grace is, because centuries later you get the true husband, Christ, who, as Ephesians 5 says, gave himself up for his bride, the church.
Christ steps in front of the danger. Abram pushes his wife into it.
The contrast couldn't be more stark. Abram's failure here shows us why we needed a better representative, a perfect husband.
It's just the blindness of fear is on full display. He's risking the entire future of redemption to avoid a potential temporary danger.
That's what fear does. The immediate threat feels so much more real than the eternal promise. It shows you that faith isn't something you achieve once. It's a moment-by-moment reliance that Abram just completely abandoned.
So here's the crazy part. The plan works.
On a worldly level, it works perfectly, just like he predicted. The Egyptians see Sarai as beautiful. The princes tell Pharaoh about her.
And verse 15 says the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house.
That word, lakah, taken or acquired, it's a business transaction. This is the low point of the story.
He has just handed over the mother of the promised seed. The whole plan of salvation is now, from a human standpoint, in the hands of a pagan king.
The text just lets that tension hang there. It's a terrifying moment. And it's a stark picture of depravity. Even the friend of God, the man who heard God's voice, is capable of this. Capable of sacrificing the most sacred thing for his own safety.
And to make it even worse, he gets rich from it.
This is what our sources call the irony of material reward. Verse 16 says, "For her sake he dealt well with Abram." That phrase, "for her sake," is just dripping with condemnation.
He's getting paid for his wife's capture.
It's essentially a bride price. He gets sheep, oxen, donkeys, servants, camels, a huge amount of wealth. And the text shows him just accepting it. No protest, no confession. He's counting his sheep while Sarai is in the harem.
And this is where a figure comes into the story who will cause so much future pain.
Yes. The list of assets includes female servants. The scholarly consensus is very strong that this is where Hagar enters Abram's household.
Hagar, the mother of Ishmael.
The very one. So the blessing, this wealth he got through his sin, it's a Trojan horse. It brings the source of future family conflict and redemptive historical conflict right into his tent.
The consequences of sin aren't always immediate punishment. Sometimes they look like gifts.
And those are often the most dangerous kind. The very thing he gained for his own security becomes the biggest threat to his family's peace down the line.
This whole section is just a wrecking ball to any idea that material wealth automatically equals God's favor.
It is. Abram is rich. He's safe from the famine. He looks successful. But he's morally bankrupt and completely out of God's will.
He has the world's security, but he's risked the promise.
And God, in his patience, lets the scheme play out. He lets the tension build to its absolute maximum before he steps in. It's a way of proving that our clever plans, even when they succeed, can never actually ruin God's ultimate plan. Only God can clean up this mess.
And it's clear Abram can't fix this. He's passive, he's complicit.
He's totally trapped by his own success. The rescue has to come from outside. And that's exactly what happens next.
All right, so just when it looks completely hopeless, verse 17 arrives, and it's a sharp turn. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh. The whole focus of the story shifts.
It's the turning point, the hinge of the entire passage. And the Hebrew grammar here is so important. The subject, Yahweh, the Lord, is put right at the front of the sentence.
Emphasizing that he is the one acting now.
He is the primary actor. God doesn't wait for Abram to repent or pray his way out of this. He acts on his own. And he does it purely because he is faithful to the covenant he made, not because Abram deserves it.
This is pure, unconditional grace.
It's the definition of sovereign grace. God intervenes because of who he is, not because of what Abram has done.
And the way God intervenes, it points to something much bigger later on.
It really does. The text says God sent great plagues, Negam Gedalim. That word for plague, naga, is the same root word used for the plagues of the Exodus.
When God struck Egypt to free Israel.
Exactly. So what we're seeing here is a proto-Exodus, a small-scale version of the main event. God strikes this Pharaoh to release Sarai, who is the mother of Israel.
So it's showing that God's power isn't just limited to Canaan, he's Lord everywhere.
His jurisdiction runs all the way to Pharaoh's throne room. And it also shows us something about the plagues themselves. We don't know what they were, but they were severe enough to stop Pharaoh from consummating the marriage. God supernaturally protected the purity of the messianic line.
So God is protecting the promise from the failure of the promise keeper.
That's it, exactly. It's a miniature echo of the Exodus. Just as God will strike a later Pharaoh to release the nation, he strikes this first Pharaoh to release the woman who carries the seed of the nation. Without this act, the whole story ends right here.
For those of us who hold to Reformed theology, this is a powerful example of what the Westminster Confession says about providence.
It's a textbook case. The confession says that God's providence even extends to the sins of humanity, which he limits and directs for his own holy purposes.
So God didn't make Abram lie?
Absolutely not. The text condemns the lie. But God sovereignly controlled the consequences of the lie. He allowed Abram's fear to create this crisis, but he put a boundary on it. He didn't let it destroy the promise.
He's the master of the chessboard, as one source put it.
He is. He sees Abram make a disastrous move, but instead of flipping the board over, he uses Pharaoh's own actions to checkmate the situation and protect the queen, Sarai, which guarantees the future of the king.
It just demolishes any idea that God is just reacting to our choices. He's sovereign even over our failures.
And that's why the covenant is secure. If it depended on Abram's performance, it would be over. But because it's a covenant of grace, God provides the solution when man creates the problem. Our security isn't in our weak grip on God, it's in his unbreakable grip on us.
The crisis gets resolved, but not in the way you'd expect. It's not God speaking to Abram, it's Pharaoh.
This is one of the most humbling moments in the whole book of Genesis. The pagan king calls in the prophet of God and gives him a sermon.
And it's a sermon full of moral clarity. What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife?
The irony is just staggering. Abram was called to be a blessing to the nations. Instead, he brought a curse, a plague on Egypt. And the unbelieving world, in the person of Pharaoh, is holding up a higher ethical standard than the believer.
And Abram just stands there. He says nothing.
His silence is his confession.
Yeah.
What can he say? His clever plan has been exposed for what it was. A selfish, wicked lie.
Pharaoh's questions. What? Why? Why?
It's like a cross-examination.
It functions like the law. It just exposes the sin and shuts the mouth of the sinner. Abram thought he had a good strategy, but Pharaoh shows him it was just a violation of basic truth.
The man Abram was afraid would kill him is the one demanding righteousness from him.
And that strips Abram of any claim to moral superiority. It's a public shaming. He can never say he was chosen because he was better than the nations around him.
So what's the consequence? Not execution, which he probably deserved.
In the ancient Near East, this was a capital offense. You don't lie to a king like that. But instead, Pharaoh says, here is your wife, take her and go. It's an expulsion, a deportation, but it's also an act of mercy. Severe
A
mercy.
very severe mercy. And verse 20 adds that Pharaoh gave him an armed escort to see him safely out of the country. The word for sent him away, shalach, is the same word used for Israel's release in the Exodus.
So even the release is a picture of grace?
It is God's grace working through a pagan king to preserve his servant, not with the reward he deserved, which was death, but with the rescue the covenant required.
And then finally, the restoration. He has to go back.
That's the bookend to the whole story. Genesis 13 says Abram went up from Egypt. The Hebrew is Allah. It's the direct opposite of when he went down, Yared.
His geography is once again tracking his spiritual state.
And he doesn't just wander. He goes back to the place of the altar, the exact spot where he first worshipped. This return is the physical sign of his repentance. He's going back to the place of dependence on God.
So the restoration isn't him earning his way back into God's good graces.
Not at all. God already rescued him. The discipline, the shame he experienced from Pharaoh is what drove him back to the altar. It's a picture of preservation. God keeps his people, even when he has to use painful means to bring them back to a place of worship.
So we've walked through the story of failure and rescue. The big question at the end is, what does the story of the father of the faithful failing so badly? What does that mean for you, the listener?
It means we have to stop looking for our savior among flawed human beings. The Bible is honest about the failures of its greatest saints for a reason, to make us look beyond them. The promise moves forward, but it's not because Abram is a steady, courageous hero.
It forces us to look for someone better.
It forces us to look for the true seed, for Jesus, and the contrast between Abram and Christ here is just, it's everything.
Especially in that role of the husband.
Yes. Abram's motive was that it may go well with me. He put his wife in danger to save himself. Christ, the true husband, does the complete opposite. He loved the church and gave himself up for her.
He steps in front of the wrath of God so that his bride can live.
The gospel is the total reversal of Abram's scheme. The husband takes the blow so the bride is spared.
And even that pattern of descent and ascent we saw, Christ fulfills that too.
He does, but perfectly. Abram went down to Egypt in fear and sin. The nation of Israel went down and became slaves. But Jesus, as a child, is taken down to Egypt.
Out of Egypt I called my son.
Right. He is the true Israel who goes down into bondage but remains perfectly sinless. And when he ascends, it's not with wealth gotten through a lie, like Abram. He ascends from the grave, leading captivity captive, winning righteous gifts for his people through a true victory.
So this whole narrative then becomes this powerful argument for justification by faith alone, for solified.
It has to be. Because if God's covenant depended on Abram's moral performance, on his truth-telling, it would have ended in that harem. The story is screaming sovereign grace. God saved the messianic line in spite of Abram's failure.
Which means our standing with God rests on something much more solid than our own obedience.
It rests on God's faithfulness and his oath, which find their ultimate expression in the finished work of Jesus Christ. He's the one who never failed, who never had to lie to protect himself. So the final takeaway from this story isn't try to be a better Abram. It's trust in the God of Abram, because he is faithful even when we are not. #outro.
And that wraps up our deep dive into Genesis 12.10-20. We've seen that the covenant's security doesn't rest on the shaky performance of a man like Abram who failed his first big test, but on the absolute fidelity of the Lord, who stepped in to rescue his own promise.
So as you think about this, we have to reject that Egyptian path, the path of fear and manipulation that Abram chose. Think about your own life. How often does that instinct for self-preservation make you compromise or tell a half-truth or just act out of fear instead of faith? The great comfort here is that you are secure, not because you have a perfect grip on God, but because he has a perfect grip on you, and by his grace, that grip will never let go.